Welcome to Liberty Talk Canada. I'm Odessa Orlowitz. Thank you for joining me today. I have somebody who's really taken podcast by storm. If you haven't heard of him already, some of you probably have. He's very well known. Matt Ehret, Ehret, is sitting backstage, and I was so lucky to actually have him find a couple hours where he's not on every other podcast. I'll give you guys his bio. Matthew is a journalist and co-founder of the Rising Tide Foundation. He's the editor-in-chief of Patriot Review, senior fellow at the American University of Moscow, and co-host of The Great Game on Rogue News, breaking history on Badlands Media and connecting the dots on TNT Radio. He's authored the book series The Untold History of Canada, Science Unshackled, and the recently published book series The Clash of the Two Americas. Matt has appeared on many high-profile shows. I added that. Including recently Man in America as just one of them. Quick message from my sponsor and I'll bring him on. Did you know if the banks do a bail-in, they can take the contents in your bank vault? But storing your gold and silver at home could be a huge security risk. Every day our dollar is worth less and less. Inflation is stealing the only savings families have. Now more than ever, it's so important to hedge the savings you've worked so hard for. Banks have been failing all over the world and social credit has all but arrived. But did you know you can do wholesale price vaulting and retail delivery from the most prestigious, reliable company in Canada? Did you also know if you decide to leave Canada, your gold and silver can be sent right to you after you arrive to your destination? The only company I personally use and trust are those awake guys at New World Precious Metals. Take control of your family's future. You can just click the link in my show description or type in the web address libertytalkcanada.ca/gold to get on their mailing list, attend their webinar, or book an appointment. Let them know Odessa sent you. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, Odessa.
So I discovered you, I don't even know how. I found one of your shows and I was blown away because when I discover someone that is so much more intelligent than me and knows so much more than me, I am like so excited because right now I know a lot about what's going on and I know a lot about the big picture of what's going on where most people don't understand how we're being played. But I know nothing about the grand picture. And so I've been watching your videos and, everyone's asking you to come on because you are explaining. I mean, you write about so many different things, but you are explaining how we got to the place we are and by whom. And I don't want to forget to ask you how I think you said it all goes back to the city of London eventually, the one that has their own laws where they can do anything, not the actual London, but city of London. I think you said that. And you also, I want to make it clear to everybody that I've watched enough of Matt's videos to show that he's not for or against when we get to the Hamas situation, which is way down the story, anybody. He's showing how all of us are being played. And so nothing can be taken out of context here. You have to listen to the whole thing. And so I really appreciate how, you can bring us back to stop fighting about this on Twitter and understand the bigger picture. Because the last thing we need is a whole bunch of people are being played hating each other, right? Anyways, I will stop talking. But you and I talked about this episode and I was like, can we talk about this? Can we talk about this? And you're like, oh, it's so much bigger than that. We're going to do what you want, Matt. So get started.
That's fun. Well, thank you for that super generous introduction. And I'll try to do some justice to that in any way that I can. I think that the idea of oligarchical systems is a good starting point because I think we're often treated or mistreated to a fallacious recounting of our history books since we are all born into an oligarchical system. We're born into a system which is already quite unnatural. And we're recording this. I don't know when it's going to go live, but we're recording this on November 22nd, which is the 60th anniversary of John F. Kennedy's murder.
Oh.
And that's a good thing to hold in mind as a milestone or a reference point, since something happened that something was already occurring before and during John F. Kennedy's presidency, but with his murder, it wasn't just the murder of a great man, as we've often been told. It was better seen as a coup d'état, a takeover of U.S. institutions that were already being corrupted before John F. Kennedy entered the stage. There was already a fifth column, an operation which was foreign directed, that had been there working and obedient to the commands of an agency of power over the ocean that many of the best founding fathers understood very well and broke away from when they established a new type of country that had never existed before in all of human existence, based on the idea of the consent of the governed, the welfare of the people as the source of the law, the idea of the inalienable rights of each individual being the source of what makes a government legitimate. Those were nice concepts, but they'd never been acted upon. So the unfortunate thing is that out of the American Revolution, which was a statistical and highly improbable, if not impossible, outcome, a bunch of farmers going to war with the biggest global world government of the British East India Company, global mercenary force, banking cartel centralized in the city of London then as today. That was like, you would be, if you were a gambler, you'd be like, there's no way. So they came out of that with a system that was based on compromise. It wasn't perfect, right? Slaves were still 3/5 of a person. There were some compromises with ignorant racist players in the game that resulted in a mixture, but it was better. It was better than what came before. And it created a precedent where Haiti all of a sudden was like, wait a minute, we can do that too? And Haiti became the world's second republic after they had their own fight against their French slave oppressors. And this spread. Many nations, India, started getting the idea that, oh, wow, we can actually also become an independent country and fight off our British oppressors. And this was part of the Mysore Rebellion of the South, led by Hyder Ali, writing letters with his son Tipu Sultan, writing letters to the Continental Congress in America saying, hey, we're in this together, fighting for humanity. So it was a global fight to bring about a more mature set of natural laws where human beings could direct our own destiny outside of the control of a master-slave type of structure, where some families were born masters, the majority were born slaves. And that was the way that the feudalists always wanted the world to be organized, right? Unfortunately, some of those traitors acted like American patriots, but they stayed behind, kind of like the Nazis that were not punished after World War II were called the stay-behinds. They were given new jobs by the CIA, by MI6, to go to work in South America, in the Middle East, all over the United States. Many leading Nazis were unreconstructed and were put to work during the Cold War, working with Anglo-American intelligence. Same kind of thing happened in 1776. Some of these stay-behinds were in their hearts loyal to the British imperial satanic structures of control, but they acted on the surface like they were patriots in order to destroy the system from within. And this is what many of the great presidents throughout history have been fighting against, including John F. Kennedy is the eighth of a line of presidents who died while in office. And when you look at what their policies were, they're all doing, to varying degrees, the same kind of thing, which is invoking constitutional banking law in varying degrees, not all the exact same, but the idea of the moral law governing the behavior of banking functions to permit for credit to be tied to the development of the nation as a whole. That's there with Harrison, murdered in 1840, with Zachary Taylor, murdered in 1852, with Lincoln, with his greenback system, murdered in 1865, with Garfield, 1880, murdered, McKinley, 1901, Warren Harding, Franklin Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy. They're all doing the same thing, and they all have a similar foreign policy outlook towards helping enslaved countries who are colonized become free and independent. That's all of their perspective, in opposition to those British East India Company global corporatists who interface, like you said, with the city of London as this city within a city, which itself gets us closer to the agency of evil, which is manipulating the world, setting things up like the Bilderberger Group, or the more recent, smaller junior partner, the Davos Forum in the 70s. But that's sort of the nesting. And it's important for people to just focus and try to map out in their minds how oligarchical systems have historically migrated and struck and done the exact same thing in a rebranded way in time. It's adaptive, but it's the same principle that has weaved itself throughout the continuity of all of human history, which you could even trace back if you look at what were the fights in ancient times of Cicero in the Roman Republic, and how Cicero was working to fight the cults, the mystery religions, the sects that had been brought in, like the cult of Magna Meter, the cult of Cybele, the cult of Gaia, which became Gaia, Demeter, other cults that were associated with creating a system of controls and brainwashing of the elites and the pacification of the masses through bread and circuses, orgies, other things that render us more bestialized and more able to be controlled. And what was Cicero doing? What were the people can map out? What were those enemies who killed him as Rome fell apart and let go of its last vestiges of republicanism as it embraced becoming an empire, and thus lost its mandate to its moral fitness to survive as it became more addicted to the system of exploitation instead of a system of what the best of the Roman republicans had aspired to. You can see the same thing in ancient Athens, as Athens lost its sanity and became an empire in opposition to the works of Socrates and the Platonic school of Athens, who were trying to stop its dive towards corruption. So there's all these universal lessons which our history books have kept from us, because again, like I was saying at the beginning, we were born into an oligarchical system that has a very particular way of reframing history so that we treat each individual thing as a thing unto itself. The murder of JFK is treated in a vacuum without context. The cause of World War II or World War I or the Great Depression or the American Revolution are treated in a hyper specialized myopic way, and people could write volumes and volumes and volumes about dissecting the minutia with no context of, well, what's the universal principle in all of that? What's it tied to before or after? Nothing. And so we feel like we've become smarter people, we get PhDs, but we're actually more mentally castrated from our ability to identify how we are living currently in the same flow of history. We can't identify those lessons that we could have otherwise learned from.
Can I ask you, since you're talking about that, you were in university, tell me just, if for 2 minutes, your experience in university and how you're like, I gotta get out of here. I mean, just tell me about making fun of your experience there.
Well, I had two sort of dances with university. On the one hand, I, as a student, was a illustration and design, and then a fine arts student. I got a degree in illustration, and then I went on to fine arts. So that was my university immersion as a student, which gave me a sort of sense of some of the sicknesses in how arts are taught. I felt in both degrees, I got a sort of sense of these two fallacies of extremes, where in the graphic design, illustration design world that I was in, it was very commercial oriented. A lot of the best you could hope for would be to maybe be a graphic designer for a magazine or sell a product for toys or do textile design. But it was all very boxy, there wasn't too much flexibility to express your thoughts and feelings in a way that I desired. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, I went through that process. Maybe video games. There's a big video game sector you could hope to work for, but it's like, I didn't want to do that either. And so I went to the opposite extreme and went into fine arts and film animation in a very fine artsy way, thinking, okay, at least here I'll be able to liberate myself and do arts for its own sake. However, the problem there I came to discover after a couple of years was, well, the ethos of the professors, the people running all of the fine arts programs, is very wired towards deconstructionism and postmodernism. So there, you will be rewarded the more you can, paint a naked body with blood or something and roll around on a canvas, or like the more bizarre it can be and the more uncomfortable it makes somebody squirm, the better it is seen as good art. And there's a whole philosophical reason tied to the Frankfurt School and wokeism from a century ago that's tied to this insanity. But all that to say, I got a feeling that was wrong. I was doing damage to my soul by trying to create
And
art that
I'm
accommodated. Yeah,
right. So I think I remember from another show you saying like you didn't want to do that. That wasn't who you
yeah.
are. You didn't want to do it. You wanted to concentrate on what you see the world as and want to see the world as, correct? Sort of?
Yeah, like I wanted at least, to play some. I wanted my art to at least speak to my morality in some way. Like I felt like there were certain injustices, certain things that I felt were wrong with the world, with people, and I didn't have a full idea of what that was. But it doesn't take you long to realize that things are sick. There's Africa shouldn't be starving. Like there's no
Mhm.
reason for that. But you're not given a very good reason why when you do speak to people who should tell you why as a young kid, so I had certain feelings that I wanted to produce something beautiful in some way. You go to art history class and you see these beautiful paintings of Rembrandt and Da Vinci and Rubens and like, why aren't we doing stuff like that anymore? Like
Mhm.
I get it. We don't want to do the exact same thing as them, but why did we stop? Why is it all of the stuff that I should aspire to that's selling for $400 million are like glowy squares, or like
Mhm.
splatterings of paint? Like,
Mhm.
where's the good? Like, where's that great stuff that we used to do?
Mhm.
So that always bothered me. And again, I didn't have the political astuteness at the time to understand how the CIA funded modern art, abstract art, atonalist music for the elite, the elite highbrow art culture that they wanted to create for their technocratic managerial class starting in the 40s and 50s. I didn't know about that. That came as later discoveries that I was like, oh, this is not just a naturally occurring genre, which is popular. This has been artificially politically induced by agencies that want to create an artificial culture, like go into any economics department in any university or in you'll find if there is art, it's going to be hyper disgusting abstract art
Well,
because part of the mm,
and it's gotten really disgusting. A couple years ago, I did a show on how, like, the US government with some of those, I can't remember their name, Podesta, how
mm,
literally through a program they're doing, they're sending porn back and forth, but it's art, so they're not getting in trouble. But the porn involves children and stuff. So, I did a whole show showing this. They can't hide it. And so,
yeah.
yeah, it's kind of gotten to the point where it's like, man, was there an agenda? And I did watch a show that you were in where did you say this whole art thing that is was put in by the CIA, was that to do with a war or after a war? There was some
Yeah.
reason?
Yeah. Yeah, it was after World War II. After World War II in 1950, 49 was the Congress for Cultural Freedom was a big CIA project that involved
Mm.
a lot of former Trotskyists who became the founding fathers of the neoconservative movement, the parasite of what became the thing that took over the Republican Party, which is very different in the 60s than it became under Dick Cheney and Rumsfeld. But these were all ironically Trotskyists who had an ideological bent of trying to bring about permanent war, permanent revolution to purge the world and create a new type of human that would be more conducively adaptive to a system of managerial controls, which is why James
Okay.
Burnham, Sidney Hook, other Trotskyists were working with the CIA, creating the Congress for Cultural Freedom with Arthur Koestler. Bertrand Russell was a leading player in that. It's a big list of misanthropic freaks, and yeah, basically the idea was let's create a system of logic because it requires some rational justification why you're going to spend billions of dollars on art as a CIA operation. Like, what are you going to do? So they paid for intellectuals to come up with an argument that would basically say that in the new Cold War, the Iron Curtain, with communism as our new enemy, and just forget about the fact that we used to work with the Chinese and the Russians to fight Nazism. Forget about Nazism. It's just communism, and the Russians and the Chinese are our new supervillains. So we're going to have a Cold War, and the art of the communists, we're going to say, is rational art which is manipulative, it's sterile, it's iconoclastic, and so that's the art of tyranny, the tyranny of logic of reason. And so the art of democracy must be the art of eros, of your passions, of irrational, the liberty to be irrational. That should be good art. And so they, after producing a lot of these treaties, which became very influential in the school system, and a lot of these are Frankfurt School, ironically, Bolsheviks, Freudian Marxist Bolsheviks, who are doing this. Ironically, keep that in mind, because now they're writing for what is the art of democracy and capitalism. They then now say, well, let's pour cash into things like Jackson Pollock or Mark Rothko. And I don't know if Mark Rothko and Pollock knew. They probably didn't, but that's where the millions and millions of dollars were poured into creating a new market for irrationalism. Just, so you had this dichotomization that was originally focused on purging the young generation of Germans, because it was first a German focused operation, and then it branched out globally to the whole transatlantic very quickly, which was, okay, let's as the Americans were in charge of the education system of Germany, they divided it up with the Russians, and the whole Berlin Wall thing set up soon after. The idea is they consciously socially engineered the German people to think in a victim complex, that there's they created something called the Fourth Reich gene, that you're all, as Germans, genetically inclined to fascism and destroying the weak. That's who you are. And children were fed this, who were like 5, 6, 7 years old in Germany in 1949. So you had, on the one hand, that. Then they were told, okay, if you want to heal yourself and be liberated from your genetic predisposition to becoming Nazis, then you need to get rid of Beethoven, Mozart, Schiller. And they basically said, all of that is the art of fascism. The new art of liberty is this. And then, so they started by promoting also nihilistic philosophy, Sartre, Jean Jaurès, and others in the literary domain. It was all being funded also by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegie Foundation, were big funders of a lot of this stuff. And then it branched out, through UNESCO, which had been set up by the eugenicist Julian Huxley. He created something called the United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization. And then that became sort of the thing that wired the reforms in school systems for the whole baby boomer generation. So all the kids born from 1945 up until, let's say, like 1963, 64, they were the target as a generation for this social engineering operation that went into making sure that in their school system, that instead of encouraging creating whole citizens that were integrated with their morality and reason developing, which was the ethos of most schools before this period. Not to say that it was done well all the time. Obviously, it's done by humans who screw up. But that was the ideal. They said, no, that's the ideal of fascism. The ideal of our current Cold War age is to have good, well-behaved, cooperative people. So they purged the classics, the study of Greek, of Latin. They purged that as like the outdated way of thinking. We won't read dead white European males anymore. That's obsolete. The new age is going to be the irrelevant thinkers, the modernists. That's what we're going to bring in. Aldous Huxley's stories around the Brave New World, we're going to give that to kids who are 12, 13 years old. That's going to formulate their idea of what humanity is, what the future is, of test tube babies and a caste system of alphas and betas. We'll feed that to them early. And then we'll give them hyper-specialized techniques as they go into high school and university. And we're going to encourage that people become hyper-specialized, so that way, when they become a cog in a machine, they won't have the aptitude to understand what the whole system is that they're a part of. And that became the guiding framework of that, was a whole system that I've talked about in my books called cybernetics, or the science of control, that was applied to all these different agencies like NATO and UNESCO and
speaking
the US government.
Speaking of books, I forgot to say in the beginning, guys, in the description, I'm going to have links to where you can find all of Matt's stuff, his channel, his books, because you could read for years. Everything you and your wife, who's also extremely intelligent, have written. This is like one tiny speck today, what we're going to talk about, which feels overwhelming of what you've covered. So I just want to make sure everyone knows your links are going to be in the description. Okay. So, and when you're talking about, I call it sort of the brainwashing of what's being taught in school. We're seeing that happen right now again, and it's going fast. and it's shocking, and it's pissing a lot of people off. And,
Mm.
you know, my sons notice it. White man bad, um, conservatism bad, uh, everyone's a victim, um, just chaos, instability now. So I know we can't get to today yet, but I'm just, you know, they're not doing a good job of hiding what they're trying to
Mhm.
make our kids become.
Yeah, it's moving fast, eh? Like they're really doubling down over the last couple of years. I was just reading a news bit from a few weeks, actually a couple of months back. The story took place in some British Columbia school board authorized speakers to come and speaking to the whole student body of these high schools, describing how to use drugs, and they were giving out kits of with instruction books and little snorting kits. Um, Regarding how do you cut your meth, how do you cut your fentanyl, how do you and what can you snort, what can't you snort, how do you do it well, how do you have safe sex when you're on drugs, and they were giving out these kits to kids who were like
Mhm,
13 years old, and it was authorized by the school board. And like,
mhm.
no, I it's hard to imagine like just 5 years ago even that flying. I don't think it would have. And I mean, there was not definitely blowback, rightfully so, but the fact that it happened, my God.
Oh
So
god,
yeah.
there's things happening that people are getting caught for, and when you expose it, they just say it's misinformation, but they're setting things up where, "No, no, no, this is it's just about this." But then they're trying to sneak in some shocking stuff. "Oh, that was a one-off. That was a mistake." Anyways, that's a whole nother episode. I've already done it on that. I've exposed
Right,
those
right.
books and
Yeah,
those cue cards. But um,
yeah.
okay, so we are going through this again. Now, we talk about I've heard you talk about how, you know, people think that the Jews are the ones that do all this, or the Palestinians or the Muslims do all this, and everyone's trying to find who's the villain. And I think I remember you talking about how something from way above is playing them as well now, and how, you know, you and I both know that most people are good in every
Yeah.
culture and religion. I have friends from every culture and religion, and
Mhm.
you know, this hate is just not true about an entire culture or religion. But I watched a show where you talked about how the very top is manipulating people into thinking that it's these people that are bad, so the ship will go down with them.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of it, and it's very convincing. There was a group of people you talked about where you were saying that I can't remember the name of the group. Oh, something of Zion. Was that some elders, Zion elders or
Oh, the
something? You were
protocols of the elders
Yeah.
of
Well, and a
Zion.
lot of people have read that. I may have even read
Yeah.
part of it. But you were talking, I think, about how that was manipulated as well.
Yes, it was.
I don't want to
Yeah.
skip around, but I just wanted to ask
No,
you.
no, it's good. No, it's an important one. It's an important one because especially with the events in the Middle East since October 7th, especially it's intense. People are grappling with this a lot, and we're seeing a lot of uh, terrible, awful, atrocious imagery of what's been going on to innocent people in the Gaza. Families have been wiped out, 13,000 so far, civilians dead, and it's like, and why is this happening? Why is it, when it's understood that the Hamas fighters are operating in a very intricate tunnel system below Gaza, far below Gaza? So what is the intention for bombing these civilian centers, the hospitals? I mean, there's something like 35 UN aid workers who've been killed. What's the purpose? What's the outcome when you know you're not actually going to be killing the so-called Hamas soldiers? Also, what was the purpose of Hamas launching the attack to begin with on January 7th? Who's controlling Hamas? Who are these billionaires, these Bedouin billionaires in Qatar who are running Hamas in the first place? Do they care? They're sitting in their luxury suites with real estate deals around. They're billionaires. You'd be surprised if they were millionaires, but they're billionaires. What are they tied to? Well, Muslim Brotherhood. What is Hamas? What is the Muslim Brotherhood? It came out of the Muslim Brotherhood. people like Chaz Freeman, the former U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia, even pointed out very clearly, as did Ron Paul, that Hamas was created by American and Israeli intelligence in '87 because they wanted a more predictable reactionary grouping that would undermine the type of positive dialogues that Yasser Arafat from the PLO had been waging with negotiating with sane, competent Israeli leaders like Yitzhak Rabin, who understood we need to work together, we need to build economic development together, which was behind the Oslo Accords in 93, 94, 95, until Yitzhak Rabin was killed, the prime minister of Israel, not by an Islamic terrorist, but by a Zionist freak who killed the prime minister of Israel. Why? Because you've got this other deep state inside of Israel that's been incubating, been groomed, just like you have a deep state inside of Egypt called the Muslim Brotherhood, which has been groomed by the same operatives who don't live anywhere near the region that they're setting on fire, using eye for an eye revanchism, lighting fires on both sides. The British, if you look at the foundation of the Muslim Brotherhood, it grew out of a British Freemasonic operation, first in the 1920s, actually first in the 1880s, using the British Suez Company that bankrolled and funded, the British Cairo office was funding the ideological father of Salafism that created a school of thinking that would read or interpret the Quran in a way that inclined people towards jihadi, like violent jihad.
Okay.
That then gave rise, once that foundation of logic was created and printed and promoted, then you could have things like Hassan al-Banna in 1928 using money from the British Suez Company to found the Muslim Brotherhood. Richard Dreyfuss is a historian, did a whole book on the Devil's Chessboard, goes into this.
Okay.
And then from there, British Freemasonic groups amplified it in the 1950-51 at the same time as the CIA was creating Mossad. So as Mossad was being created in 1951, so too was the Muslim Brotherhood revamp being created as well, that always worked together as the deep state operation inside of Turkey, inside of Syria, inside of various other countries in the Arab world, not for the people of the Arab world, but always under the influence of this foreign thing that was working to create these, I mentioned the traitor American stay-behinds after 1776 who were always loyal to the Hellfire Club, the satanic religious order inside of the British Empire that worked with the British City of London families. That's the same type of structure, modified in form, but same in substance, that was behind the growth of Nazism, which is why it's also interesting to keep these paradoxes in mind. Not only did Hamas get created by Anglo-Israeli intelligence or Anglo-Zionist intelligence, they were continuously groomed. The head of the chief Israeli intelligence officer, Amos Yadlin, had WikiLeaks had leaked his correspondence with the U.S. ambassador to Israel in 2007, praying that Hamas wins, because they wanted an excuse to have a violent force that would give the Israeli defense forces an excuse to go in and purge that area of Arabs, which is part of their ideology that was put into motion a century ago by Theodore Herzl, the sort of founding father, as he's celebrated as, of Israel, of Greater Israel. The idea that Israel is actually ordained to be a land of the chosen people from the Sinai Peninsula. The Suez Canal would be all under the Greater Israel domain, all the way to Euphrates, meaning a big chunk of Saudi Arabia, all of Jordan, big chunk of Turkey, Iraq, most of Syria would all be under the divinely ordained destiny of the chosen people, which, if you think about it, okay, that's a bad idea, if that's a recipe for disaster. But at the same time, the people who were grooming Herzl, because he wasn't a person unto himself, he wasn't in a vacuum, he was working with Lord Milner, Lord Balfour, Leo Amory, Lloyd George, who were the founders of what became the Balfour Declaration, the writers of it, the crafters of the plan to convince the world's Jews to go and live in the desert. Who were these people? Did they care about the Jews? No, they were all anti-Semites. They hated the Jews. They were all they wanted the world to be purged of Jews. They also were, for those who lived long enough, like Lloyd George or Milner, they were sponsors of fascism. Some were sponsors of Nazism. So it's like, Well, what's that about? Isn't that a bit of an irony that anti-Semitic pro-Nazi fascists were creating the state of Israel? That Israelis and Americans were sponsoring radical Islamism with British intelligence? Like maybe there's another thing that's playing all sides. That's designed to destroy most of the Arabs and most of the Jews living in that region.
Okay,
So
so
I've been,
if somebody, I want to, before I forget this thought,
yeah.
if somebody said, "Oh, Dessa, why would the elite billionaires want a war all over the world? It's their earth too. Why would they want that?" And I remember in one show you said, "Peace is not good for these people." Something synonymous to that. Peace is not good, at least right now, unless they control everything, right? Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, they like the peace of the grave, not the peace of living human beings. So the oligarchy wants peace. They do. But the kind of peace that an oligarch wants is a lot of dead people, and obedient slaves who know their role on the plantation of the mind and of the body, right? Of the physical and mental plantation.
So
So that's the kind of peace that they want.
it comes back to their ideology,
Yeah,
which a lot of people say is Satanism.
yeah, yeah. It is.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
it's Satan. Yeah.
So what we call
Yeah.
peace is different than what they call peace. They
Yeah.
have their idea of how they want things run, and they don't want any of us with our own ideas, I guess. And then it also
Yeah.
plays into that, it's a big money maker for these people, is it not? War?
Well, that's I think there's a nesting of
Mhm.
causal intentions or drives. To make a process, as humans are a system, we're a system with nested processes and nested personality types. Now, there are many people who are animated by a desire for monetary profit. You got the Halliburtons out there who want their weapons deals, and they're like drooling happily when there's like a smell of war in the air because they know that they're gonna make some money on Ukrainian people being sent into a meat grinder, and they'll make money, and they'll make money on whatever. And then you have oil, people who are directors at oil companies, Chevron and Royal Dutch Shell, who are like, okay, yeah, we can make cash by overthrowing Syria and taking Syria's oil. Good for us. But they're
And
not causal in anything. They're
right.
needed,
They
useful
are the
idiots.
ones being played because they know that humans love money, and
Yeah,
there's a price people will do things for. We've seen that
yeah,
with the C-19er. You know what I'm
yeah.
talking about.
I understand.
We've seen that in the last 3 years, that money talks.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
like yeah, exactly. Do most of the people who woke up in the morning played a really bad role in that whole nightmare? Did they know what they were doing? Did they think it through when no, they were thinking about cashing their check, getting their payout, living in their swank little gated community, whatever. They weren't thinking, but they didn't put any of that into motion. They were just needed as
Mhm.
stupid, greedy people with some
Mhm.
clout to get the process into play. But that was it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they're all evil too, but because if they realize something's wrong and they keep doing it, they're more evil, like the Bonnie Henry. Okay, so
Mm.
now, okay, do we have to go back in time to understand why this war is happening right now? What else,
Mhm.
like, for my audience to understand the big picture? You can talk for hours.
Oh yeah.
So,
Um, well, I think because yeah, the more you scratch on it, the more grandiose it gets, and the more weird it gets too. I'll be straight up honest with you. When you start going into the ideology of oligarchism and the subcults that they create synthetically to create a cultural climate that will produce individuals that will be relatively predictable and inclined towards violence with their neighbors. That type of thing requires a recognition of a degree of insanity. Like there's a degree of baked in insanity that is calculated. So it's weird to say that, right? Calculated insanity is reasonable insanity. Is that no? But it is.
psychopathy. Psychopaths are very smart, a lot of them, right?
yeah, and the creation or the amplification of systems that will bring about the psychopathological tendencies of people
Yeah.
is sort of an evil art unto itself. It's not something that anybody would just learn from studying sociology in a local university. You got to be sort of groomed into a special experience within the higher echelons of Cambridge to start accessing some of that more like, you know, that I don't want to call it like secret education, right? It's not secret. It's like it's secret in the sense that if they said what it is publicly, we wouldn't fall for it and we would be
Right.
more self-aware of how we're manipulated. So yeah, in that sense, they have to keep certain facts of the human condition in mass psychology reserved for the governing class. And those will be groomed to become leaders or managers of the next generation of upper level managers. So you gotta do something as far as breaking the human impulses as early as possible. And there's a systemic way to do that in the youth who are going to be expected to play a role, whereby they'll be allowed to use scientific logic from the higher domain, not the lower domain of technique. That's the domain that the plebeians are allowed to use technique. They're allowed to memorize mathematical formulas. They're allowed to like learn certain engineering skill sets that make them useful at maintaining a system. But in terms of the meta system of what is going on with the what is the power of science, what is the logic of systems, that's for the governing class. So well, I think the thing about, from my approach, is that this is a lot of people try to reduce it to something that they would find in a Hollywood movie. If they're looking for like a clear-cut Lex Luthor versus a Superman who's a clear-cut good guy, and it's that type of Hollywood expectation will destroy your ability to appreciate how history unfolds. You have to look at the battle of ideas, and some sets of ideas are tied to a way of thinking that it brings about discoveries of God's creation and a moral power to translate those discoveries with creativity into new technologies, which allows us to do what no other animal in the ecosystem is able to do, which is leap outside of our limits to growth. We can apply new technology that allows us to sustain more people, higher quality of life, greater powers of using their mind for work instead of their physical body for work. So we become increasingly a species of creative thought that defines us, whereby automation should be seen, if you're coming at it from that standpoint, as a divine thing, not as a cold thing that helps control the masses by a master class, the way the transhumanists define science and technology. The people like Benjamin Franklin or John F. Kennedy were pro-technologists, or in the case of Canada, John Diefenbaker or W.A.C. Bennett from British Columbia. These were morally righteous, good, anti-imperial people who love technology because they saw within technology not a cold thing run by math and formulas, but something that allows us to do God's will by ending poverty and hunger and war. That's what technology is. And the imperialists are.
And
Yeah,
let me just add to that, because I know my viewers well. Some of them are my
yeah,
friends. A lot of us, and I've taken like a step back to say, okay, we can't get too insane about this, but a lot of us, because we listen to Klaus Schwab and we listen to his advisor Yuval, and how they're talking about putting chips in us. I'm not saying that they say that, and
yeah,
controlling everybody's thoughts. Everyone is now like, technology, forget it. Let's go back
yeah,
to, farming and rotary phones, and they're trying to get us all. And so there is some great stuff about technology. And there's a guy in our movement who said, you guys, some of this technology can actually be helped to keep us free if the right people are behind it and we know how to get in away
yeah,
from this satanic class and their tech. So there's like two things happening here. Some people are very scared of crypto. Some people say, no, it's our freedom. So they've freaked everybody out with what we know, the WEF, UN, and those bodies, which you will tell me are way down low, Odessa. And they are probably
yeah.
what they want, how they want to use it, like the digital banking and stuff. So
Mhm.
We're in this place of fear, which we have a reason to be because who's the central bankers and all them behind it. But this mess of technology, Matt, can we talk about that? This
Yeah,
mess.
sure. It's a mess. Yeah. I mean, it's like it comes down to culture for me, like if you allow and tolerate a culture of immorality and mediocrity for too long, then anything that you use, all of the knives in that system of mediocrity and immorality are going to be used to stab each other and ourselves and not cut bread, and so technology is one of these things that it's like it's a neutral thing unto itself. The atom can make bombs and kill people, or it can like desalinate ocean water effectively and provide green deserts. It's like, what's the moral value of the culture which is utilizing these things? Now
Yeah.
the oligarchy, as you pointed out, have their little Yuval Hararis and Ray Kurzweils, who are religiously, they call themselves secular atheists, but they're actually religious. They have a religious belief in transhumanism, in that is a religious belief, because they see that there's like this divine, what some might call teleological, the idea that there's this future moment pulling us as if a destiny, a force of nature, through Darwinian forces of natural selection, whereby the strong will congeal over the many who are poor and weak. And those forces will cause a speciation whereby the elite class of alphas will be able to control the levers using CRISPR technology and other technologies, right? And
Yeah.
brain implants and shit.
Mhm.
Getting us into the metaverses and giving us drugs and
Yeah.
psychedelics while we're feeling our micro traumas and we're microdosing and all this stuff. So
Yeah.
you got that idea where they say, "Oh, we love technology; it's so good," and then that horrifies moral people who are like, "No, no more technology, please. Like,
Yeah.
give me the Amish life." And you're like, "Well, okay, wait a minute. Let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater, because the type of technology that these guys despise are represented by what people that they have to kill throughout history." And again, you look at again Lincoln, Enrico Mattei, the industrialist from Italy who was working on building an industrial renaissance of Africa, or Patrice Lumumba, or Kwame Nkrumah, or John F. Kennedy, or Bobby Kennedy. Like, they had a technological policy orientation that saw technology from the standpoint of that which liberates us
Mhm.
from empire.
Misery kind of. Yeah, 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 the
Yeah,
empire and
yeah.
misery. Yeah.
Yeah, because we're better controlled if we're in a state of want and scarcity, divided, more ignorant, then we're easier to manage and control as human herds. So that misery is a necessary byproduct of empire. Whereas when you have people who are living better, happier, more dignified lives, they're not so inclined to want to go to war with their neighbors. They're more inclined to look for a solution concept, the way Yitzhak Rabin and Arafat were doing with their handshake in the 90s. That's the natural sort of human way of dealing with life. So they want to break us from that. And so
Yeah.
I find myself often, having debates with people online and different who are good people,
Mhm.
but they're only looking at all of the evil uses of technology in war, in pacifying us
Mhm.
through CGI graphics and video games, and the technology of the mind drugs of Aldous Huxley and Timothy Leary, and then they forget, no, there's this, it's oversimplified here. You got to take a step back.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's part of one of my guiding lights when I do my history, my work on history. I'm there's a couple of things to hold on to, right? Because a lot of people, they get overwhelmed by just the math. Like, what are we talking about here? It's already touched on so many things. It's overwhelming, but it's important. It becomes manageable when you have a few solid principles that you can hold on to as you navigate through the different reams of disinformation, and this gets worse the more you go into deep history. But you can find, if you hold on to your North Star, there's these universal constants about the human mind in a natural, healthy, integrated state, and its political expression on a macro level in terms of societies that are animated by just laws, by good people who do certain things that are common, whether it's McKinley or whether it's Charlemagne 1,000 years earlier in Europe, who's also looking towards peace processes with his Arab neighbors,
Mhm.
with Harun al-Rashid of the Abbasid dynasty of the Muslim world, that gave gifts of elephants and even Jerusalem. He gave Jerusalem to Charlemagne, saying, "Look, instead of us going for a religious war together, how about I give you the deed? You own
Mhm.
Jerusalem. We because it's here in our territory. We will be the defenders of it for you, and we can continue to do commerce, and you can come send your scholars to our houses of wisdom in Baghdad, and we'll do astronomy together. And you had the same thing going with the Jews as well, working inside of Septimania and Narbonne, working with Charlemagne and the Muslims at the same time, building trade and cooperation with the Chinese world as well through the Tang Dynasty's Silk Road. So you got these beautiful bursts where, if you just look at it, like it's the same thing that the oligarchy always hates. It manifests then, as it does in any time you look at it, in explosions of new discoveries, beautiful architecture. Like, look at the Carolingian revolution in architecture based on what came before, and then that, and the level of expression of beauty, the training of orphans to read, the translation of classics from ancient Greece is exploding. And it's happening with peace processes going on with their neighbors, right? The Jews and the Muslims and the Christians and the Chinese are all kind of like working together. You're like, that's what the Crusades were all about destroying. Because you're like, well, what were the Crusades? We talk about how America's modern crusades of the neocons, like want to create Christian Zionist wars that would involve overthrowing Saddam Hussein and Bashar al-Assad and Gaddafi. We call it the modern crusades, but we often don't give it the proper value of what does that mean? Because the people who put this into motion in our age know exactly what this means, because that was the geopolitical purpose of the first set of crusades, was to get these allies to start killing each other by cultivating the worst aspects of Christianity that were all about jihadi, take the Holy Land from the infidels, the worst aspects of Islam, which were also incubated and funded by the same Venetian financiers who later on took control of Britain a few centuries later.
You said Phoenician financiers?
Oh, actually, that's a funny little, that might have been a subconscious thing. Venetian at the time?
Venetian. No, I didn't hear. I couldn't hear. Okay, because my husband and I are like, did he say Venetian or Phoenician at the last one? He's like, I think he said Phoenician. I'm like, I think he said Venetian. And we're like, we have no idea. You got to ask. Okay.
There were some Venetian cult operations that were rebranded, yes, into Rome and then into Venice. So you're kind of right, even though I made a mistake. There is an element of truth, but there's a good thing in the Phoenician system too, in Carthage and what have you, that was also destroyed, which was a good thing. So you got these like two opposing currents within any area that you're trying to dissect. You'll rarely find just one thing. You'll find usually two opposing traditions. Yeah.
So that's why they want to keep us ignorant that group of people all bad, that group of people all bad. Keep us fighting. They can't have peace, the higher ups, if it means all of us unifying and not needing them. They need to be able to control us. So I have a question. What happened with Hamas and Israel recently? Some people are saying that's because Netanyahu was starting to get along with and do peace and economic deals with, who was it? Was it he wanted to do it with Saudi Arabia? Or as some people are saying, Hamas did this because they don't want to see Netanyahu working with certain people. Which countries was that? And do you think this happened because things were going to go in a direction that the oligarchs didn't want? Is that why this thing with Israel's happening? Can you tell me about that? What you think?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like we came very close to a durable peace process before October 7th of this year, where you had, through the work, I mean, Donald Trump played a very important role in what became known as the Abraham Accords. Very important, because if you're going to be able to invest in building infrastructure, which is so desperately needed to achieve any kind of durable peace process, you need to build infrastructure. It's desert. They need water. They don't need Henry Kissinger. So
you're talking about Gaza. You're talking about Gaza,
but the broader Middle East there's a lot of desert that needs to be that can be transformed into green. It's vitamin-rich soil, but it's dry. So you got to bring in desalinated water. There's a lot of like aquifers under the soil of the Sahara, like that Gaddafi was trying to bring to the surface. There's things like that would require multi-generational, long-term thinking. It's the way to make any kind of dialogue of peace possible, because you can talk about peace, but if you can't like make it happen through economic development, it'll be undermined very, very easily. And there's so much baggage and hostility that's multi-generational, right? So the Abraham Accords was part of the recognition of Israel by its Arab neighbors Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Jordan, many others were signing on quickly to recognize Israel for the first time as a nation, which would have
Mhm.
also have brought in a recognition of Palestine as a nation, which
Okay.
was never permitted. So the UN resolution in 1947 that established the state of Israel also established the state of Palestine, except only half of that resolution was abided by. The other half was ignored. So even
Okay.
today, that's why Palestine never was allowed to have a representative at the UN for a vote on anything. So that Abraham Accords would have then created that normalization. And then with that normalization, with that reduced chance of hostility, you could now have a climate for business investments that would be 3, 4, 5, 10 years, because investors don't want to invest in a place that might be blown up. That's why you're not going to invest in, a company that's building a rail system in Syria while Bashar al-Assad is
This is
fighting a
going
civil
on.
war.
Yep.
Yeah, you have to
Yep.
put that fire out first and then talk
Mhm.
business.
Okay.
So China, Russia were very much in support of that normalization process. There was a discussion as well, very vibrantly for many years, to build high-speed rail, other projects also in Israel, connecting it to Jordan, Saudi Arabia. So there are all sorts of like constructive things, but the problem is you've got this Zionist cult, which is
Mhm.
also that's the thing that killed Yitzhak Rabin. It works with the Muslim Brotherhood, ironically, but not ironically, which is again controlled by billionaires in Qatar. That's the Egyptian deep state. If people want to know what caused or what made the Arab Spring such a disaster that it was, you got to look at the Muslim Brotherhood's operation in overthrowing governments like Mubarak and Gaddafi and Tunisia and spread out. That's what it was, and it was always worked with British and Anglo-American and Zionist intelligence forces. That, in this case of the groupings around Benjamin Netanyahu, and I'm not fully sure where Netanyahu stands in this thing. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I don't either.
I can't peg him fully. I'm not impressed. I'm really not impressed so far. Let's just say that. He said the right things about deep state operations and stuff, but then I'm like, who are you working with the Likud party? What's your view of Greater Israel? And it seems like he's been playing a role that's very, very bad in terms of advancing this Greater Israel, purge the realm of Arabs, and restore what God demanded the chosen people do take control of at the end times. So you have these messianic end times cultists who are embedded both within the Christian world as well as in the Jewish world, as well as in the Muslim world, who have been incubated, funded, and fueled by these cult controllers and manipulators who are above the game board, so that they've
And I have
been.
to say, because
Yeah,
I have friends that are Christians, and other religions, and I was starting to have friends that were Muslim with the Million Person March, and then conveniently this happened, so,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
conveniently.
yeah,
Um, uh, I listen to different Christian friends right now, and I listen to them fight with each other about exactly what's happening right now. Revelation, Christians have to stand with the Jews because that's what it says in the Bible. And then I saw this other man who said, no, the Bible actually didn't say that originally. It's been changed. There's so much fighting going on. I mean, some is respectful, and I'm just listening. And it's like, I don't know. So by
yeah. I
saying
mean,
I stand with this or I stand with that,
yeah,
I feel like we are being played from something so
yeah,
much higher. It doesn't mean I don't believe in the Bible. I do. I do.
yeah,
I do. I consider myself Christian, but just like with COVID or cliques in high school or other garbage people I hung out with who I realized were garbage and you have to walk away from your whole clique, I don't I don't jump into to be accepted, I'm going to think this. I have to
yeah.
take a step back and really look at, is this actually, Satan at work with the way these
Mm,
people think, getting all of us fighting with each other because they've destabilized even Canada. We're even becoming destabilized, most peaceful people. So that's why I wanted to bring you on, especially, is to give everybody a grand look at other ideas, and you being a historian, as
mm,
to where we are right now. And it's interesting. I was going to say, where do you think Netanyahu stands in this? And is he just being played to because they know he's passionate about don't screw with Israel, I'll blow you away? Do we also
mm,
think that the end goal is to have 500,000 people from Gaza in Canada, 500,000 in wherever it was in Europe or America. Do you think that is the grand plan with the oligarchs to get them all out?
Okay, so from what I gather, and as I mentioned, keep in mind what I said about the Nazis and anti-Semites who created the state of Israel to begin with over a century ago, and then also keep in mind what Henry Kissinger said in 2012 to the Jerusalem Post when he was being asked, "What's your view of Israel in 10 years?" And his answer was, "In 10 years, Israel's not going to exist anymore." And he freaked out the journalists who didn't know what he was talking about. Now, keep also in mind that Trump fired Kissinger, who was in opposition to his Abraham Accords.
Okay.
Right. These are all three things to keep in mind. Why was Trump in opposition to something that seems so reasonable as the Abraham Accords of recognizing Israel by its Arab neighbors and establishing Palestine as a state, recognizing that it also deserves to have a statehood? What's so bad about that Kissinger had to get fired by Trump? Okay. So I think the part of the plan has been to, oh man, just saying this, it's tough for some people to hear it, but I think part of the plan, going back some ways in the past,
it's free speech. We all are thinking
yeah,
about what's going on. So what you think
they
doesn't
want,
necessarily mean what I think. It's just we're just talking.
yeah, we're just talking. All right, so my thinking, my hypothesis that I think is pretty well informed, when I got some evidence to bring to the bear, and is that they've been trying to wipe the Jews off the map, and convince the world's Jews around the world to go and live in the desert in a very highly volatile spot at an intersection of the major civilizational states of the world, the Asia and Russia and Africa and the Central Asia, the Caucasus, Europe, all kind of pivots around Jerusalem and the Holy Land. So from the standpoint of purely manipulative, cold British grand strategy geopolitics, that is the most strategic spot. Whoever can keep that zone in instability can ensure or disrupt any potential danger of an alliance of cooperation amongst ancient civilizational powers that work together, the way I mentioned we had with that burst of activity in the 8th and 9th century with Harun al-Rashid and Charlemagne and their Chinese neighbors, and some Jews as well in Khazaria, which plays an interesting role in this whole thing. Now, the thing that I think is, I mentioned that the Protocols of Zion, I didn't answer your question, but this plays into what you're saying now. It was a hoax, and before the protocol, because if you read the Protocols of Zion, it's a lot of people have read it, and a lot of people are reading it now, especially because of what's going on. It talks about a Freemasonic Jewish bankers conspiracy to take over the world and get rid of basically do that. Mm-hmm. It reads in a way, if you read enough writings of grand strategists who make policy and misshape history, there's a sophistication in their way of communicating. Mm-hmm. Like read a Bertrand Russell, just read a Bertrand Russell, some of his works. He's super evil, but read his Science and Society, or read his there's a few things, but you could, or read Lord Balfour's writings. You read any of these grand strategists, they communicate in a certain way. Then read Protocols of Zion. Number one, it reads kind of like a cartoon. It's not like anybody who has the brilliant sophistication to manage global systems over multiple centuries doesn't communicate that way. It's written because it's catered to an audience that they want to create a polarized charge against the Jews, right? Okay. So, but there's elements of truth. There are Freemasonic conspiracies. There are Jewish bankers that are put to work doing very bad things. The Rothschilds, the Sassoons, the Montefioris. These are high-level Jewish mercenary families that were brought in the 12th century, 13th century during the Crusades to be court bankers, to carry out economic warfare against rivals of the Venetian Empire, of various nominally Christian kingdoms of Europe. They can't really do usury in the Muslim or Christian world, so the Jews, which didn't have the anti-usury thing in their religious texts, were very useful, and the ones that were really sociopathic and very good at carrying out murder would be granted little dynastic privileges, little rights they would be rewarded in orders of initiation ceremonies, and so they were used, but there were also convenient scapegoats too. So as soon as people who were feeling the burn of economic warfare if they when they didn't want to feel the burn, they would attack the arsonists. Well, the arsonists who were assigned to do the dirty work would often be these Jewish families. So they were useful.
Fauci.
Yeah, good example.
That's
Oh
a good
yeah,
example.
yeah,
There's so much higher than that. But
yeah,
okay,
but yeah.
but you think, I think I heard you right, that you think the agenda might be that actually this war right now with Israel and Gaza is to actually hurt the Jews? Is that what you're saying?
It's to use them like you would use a silkworm. And Sun Yat-sen made a point warning his fellow Chinese in 1923 that, look, if you trust the British Empire, they will use you and discard you when you're no longer useful. And that's what the stupid Chinese people who he was talking to, he was the first president, right, of China, and he was like saying, look, this is what they're going to do. They will use you like a silkworm farmer uses a silkworm. They extract the silk, and when it's no longer useful, they burn you. And this was exactly what the British did do to China after World War I. Now, the case of Israel, they were as a mechanism within the Meir Lansky crime syndicate, it was useful for intelligence. Shin Bet played a certain role. The Mossad played a certain role with MI6, Muslim Brotherhood, Nazis even. Like they were actually working with unreconstructed Nazis like Klaus Barbie or Otto Skorzeny, getting intelligence that led to disasters like the 6-Day War, overseen by Nazi intelligence officers, providing them that stuff. So Israel has played a role in organized crime throughout the Cold War. That's a thing. Not Israel as a state, because there's a lot of good Israelis, but I'm talking about this deep state thing. But at the end of the day,
I just I've already been on anti-hate once. We are clarifying, which is so stupid. Oh my God.
Yeah, they got me.
You're so much smarter than the dipshit running that. Well, actually, no, he's a useful idiot, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's just smart enough to be a useful idiot. I don't know how he's handling the pro-Palestine marches all over Canada now. Is he going to put everybody on anti-hate? But meanwhile, it's all his friends in the unions that are doing this. So is he going to have to call everyone an anti-Semite? I mean, he's got himself into such a pickle the way Trudeau has. It's like, dude, your time's up. Like nothing you do now is valid. Anyways, Bernie Farber's that his name? My God, he's a disgusting piece of schmegma. Anyway, I like making fun of him on Twitter, but he did block me for, calling him out on his, what are you going to do now? Are all your friends going to be on anti-hate? Like, I just love how it's blown up in his face. Anyway, that's funny. You've been on there too. You and I'm just listening, are not saying it's these people or these people or these people. It's this oligarchy that infiltrate themselves into all these different places to make sure that unity doesn't happen without them deciding what's unified. So it's just psychopathic people in any religion or race that are being used to perform. And that's the thing is that, it bothers me when I hear some people going, like the Jews are bad. I'm like, no, the Jews aren't bad. The Jews are people. I have friends that are Jewish. They don't have a clue what's going on. Well, just like most Palestinians don't have a clue what's actually going on, how we've all been manipulated from above. We are all just victims in this grand monopoly. And I felt like I had to say that because, you get hate for one sentence taken out of context. Yeah. And I've watched enough of your stuff to say, like, you are by far not a racist. So does that mean if you think that's the end goal, we'll see if they accomplish it, right? Does that mean you don't think that a bunch of people from Gaza will be shipped off to all of our countries? Do you think that?
Oh, no, I didn't say that. No, that's not what I said. No.
Okay.
It's that too. It's that too.
Okay.
So part of what they want to do as part of the Greater Israel program that was put forth by Richard Pearl in the Clean Break, because the Project for New American Century neocon crowd wrote a policy document in 1996 for Netanyahu when he had his first try at prime minister. And the Clean Break Doctrine is subtitled "The Strategy for Securing the Realm," and it basically calls for military invasions into this is 1996 into Iraq, into Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, or purging Palestine, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. I think Iran is the big fish. So that's what it goes for. Now, I think that Egypt, Saudi Arabia, by the time that 9/11 rolled around, because this is the same crowd that did the Pearl Harbor, that called for needing to create a Pearl Harbor incident that would then change the psyche of Americans, that would then acquiesce to things that they would normally not accept, like
Exactly.
military invasions, new crusades in the Middle East. So
Hmm.
that Pearl Harbor moment happened. I won't say how. I think everybody watching knows how. I think there was probably not I think, there was a negotiation between the Saudis and the Egyptians at the time, who bought themselves a little bit of the time by playing the corrupt game. You know, the Saudis had a certain role to play, or a faction of them did, in 9/11, at least creating the cover story. You know, the
Hmm.
Egyptians also did a certain amount of agreements as well with the Muslim Brotherhood, who played a role in that whole operation. But then what happened in the Clean Break Doctrine, it began to play. And Wesley Clark, the former head of NATO, the general who ran for the president, gave a speech where he said, look, at the end of the day, I was given a briefing by Paul Wolfowitz, who oversaw the Clean Break, saying that within 5 years, we're going to focus on 6 invasions leading up to Iran being the big one.
Right. So they needed 9/11.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So part
And
of
you
that
think
is,
Bush was involved in that, don't you think?
he was too stupid to be involved. Like, yeah, he was involved, but it's
Yeah.
like,
But at a
he didn't know
low,
what was
low
going on.
end. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Because
yeah, he was a little
yeah.
monkey. He had no clue.
Okay.
It's like, how's this thing work?
That's okay. You think,
Um,
okay. There's so many
yeah, no,
theories
I
about
think
9/11.
Cheney is a little bit more on the inside, like the
Yeah.
people who are around Cheney, who came in with Zbigniew Brzezinski, like Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz. These are the guys that were first brought in back in the 70s under the
Hmm.
Team D operation that purged the CIA in 78, 79, and set the stage for the first trap set for the Russians to get sucked into the quagmire in Afghanistan. That was Zbigniew. And part of that involved playing the Islamist card by funding, using U.S. taxpayer money under Operation Cyclone, these radicalizing madrasas that would produce jihadis that would then be used as weapons of chaos, that would then
Yeah.
suck in, that would overthrow a progressive government in Afghanistan, and who was allied to the Russians, drawing the Russians into a draining Vietnam type war, which is what happened. And the consequence was, now we got Al Qaeda, because that's where Al Qaeda came from. And Al Qaeda continued to be bankrolled and used to topple Gaddafi, to topple Bashar al Assad. It's currently being used in Mali and Sudan. There's
Hmm.
different branches of it, but it's all directly bankrolled, funded by Anglo American intelligence, all of it. And Hamas is an outgrowth of one branch of the Salafist school of the Muslim Brotherhood. So it's important to look at this, like the simple causal core that branches out, not get drawn into
Hmm.
the bottom up like
Yeah.
myopic layering, which confuses a lot of people. But look at it this way, the top down way first, and then bounce back to the details.
Yeah.
But always keep in mind on the top down thing.
Hmm.
And so part of it is, establish a greater Israel. It got postponed. Certain things happened that were not part of the plan. So that 7 countries, 5 years, it fell out of the time frame. So that script was disrupted by some good things, actually. And now they're going for that script again. So part of it is, if you want to create a terrorist, the best thing to do is like destroy a bunch of families. You'll take a very moderate Arab person, or any person who
Hmm.
is just wants to live a good life, kill their families, their loved ones, their babies, and do that for enough decades, and you'll make a terrorist who has
And
nothing
that's
to
what
live
they're
for.
doing in
But
Gaza. They're just creating angry people.
yeah,
I don't blame them, but
no, you understand it, right? Like, we get the psychology of how this works, and so
yeah.
part of it is they're trying to create a purge of the Gaza to get them first to go to Egypt, which would then create sort of a bolstered. This is the problem that El Sisi has, the president of Egypt currently, because people are like, oh, he's so cold for
Yeah.
not allowing the people of Palestine to go into Egypt to get sanctuary. He's in a very tough spot, because on the one hand, he's dealing with the Muslim Brotherhood deep state, which he's got to kind of like negotiate with, kind of like the way Trump had to negotiate with a lot of corrupt operations around him.
Yeah.
So too does any leader have to deal with this. So he's got that. Now, the part of the thing that his foreign minister warned Israel is like, look, if we do this, well, that's 2 million people. Many of them are under the influence of Hamas. They've been highly radicalized. This will be a paramilitary operation that Hamas will then use, interfacing with the Muslim Brotherhood, which is already here. that will launch a future war and attack onto Israel, giving you an excuse to attack Egypt, which is what
Uh-huh.
these people want, is a reason to attack Egypt, to take control
Okay.
of what they believe, like the whole Suez Canal. That's what the greater Israels believe. That's also why they want a lot of these groups to go into Saudi Arabia, where Mohammed bin Sultan, who's a reformer, he's pushed back against the more, there's a faction, I won't name names for people, but there's a very evil faction that worked with Cheney to do the 9/11 thing, and that
Mhm.
have been bankrolling and funding radical Islamic mosques for decades. That grouping has been taken down in large measure in Saudi Arabia since 2017, and Mohammed bin Sultan represents a much more progressive thinking
Mm.
in Saudi Arabia that wants peace, it wants technological development, it wants to get off of just being an oil exporting hub, and they want to have nuclear power, they want high-speed rail, they want to work with their neighbors, they want to recognize Israel, they still do, as a state, so that they could have peace with Israel. They've rebuilt relations with Iran. China has been behind a lot of these peace deals with Iran and Saudi Arabia, and Yemen. They had a big war for 6 years. The Chinese had negotiated this peace process based on the idea that we can pour money in building up infrastructure. And this creates a different kind of climate. But so the Israelis want an excuse to go in and declare war, or not the Israelis, sorry. These
Mhm.
radical Zionist deep state operatives want an
Yeah.
excuse to have a bunch of Hamas build-up Muslim Brotherhood operatives in Saudi Arabia lobbing bombs, missiles into Israel to go in and take that big chunk of control of there. They want it. That's why they're still launching attacks onto Hezbollah in Lebanon, because they want an excuse. They want to provoke also Lebanon to get into the war so that they can finish off what they tried to do in 2006, which is to wipe out Lebanon and take control there. They're still launching attacks into Syria. That is, these forces are still doing that to this day. They want to finish off the job that was started in 2012 by overthrowing Assad, putting in basically creating a situation where they have to bring in order. So they want that. Now, at the end of the day, that's going to create what's going to come with this whole operation is it's designed not to work.
Okay.
It's designed to create a massive regional war where every Arab in the world will want to destroy Israel, which they don't want to do currently, but the desire is increasing with every moment of injustice. So that's part of the massive conflagration. And let me just read a quote
Okay.
to give
This
you a
is
sense.
very, very interesting. I'm really happy about this whole interview. I'm just ecstatic how it's going. But this section is just so important, where we're just being dragged through the mud to what you think the final agenda is.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Okay, so keep going.
All right. So I'm going to read a quote from a very influential rabbi named Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, Kook, from a book that he wrote called the Ehret. And it's the reason why he's so important is he's a Kabbalist rabbi who was the British selection to be the head rabbi for the Ashkenazic Jews of British Mandate Palestine and then and Jerusalem. So between 1919 to 1935, when he died, he was the head rabbi under British Mandate Palestine, used by the British imperialists. He worked very closely with fascist collaborators like Vladimir Jabotinsky, the man who Benjamin Netanyahu's father was the personal secretary for, and who worked very closely with the Trotskyists, with Trotsky himself coming out of Ukraine. Trotsky was on the Russian side, but they were working closely together, and Trotsky would send his Jewish recruits to Jabotinsky, who then ran things like the secret brigades that would carry out terrorist activity against the Arabs living in the Middle East as part of the preparation for bringing in the Jews from Russia, who didn't want to live in Russia anymore because, Tsar Nicholas II believed what he read when he was given through the courtiers who were assigned to be around him, the Protocols of Zion, which came out of the Russian Okhrana, the Russian secret police. That was an agency kind of like the U.S. FBI later. It was run by Freemasonic operatives tied to the old Russian nobility that wanted to restore feudalism. They wanted to undo the reforms of Alexander II and III, who were bringing in Lincoln's economists and engineers into Russia to build the Trans-Siberian Railway, to modernize, to incorporate the Jews into modern civilization. That was what was going on in Russia in the 1870s, 80s, 90s. So that process of development, which is tied to also extending rail, again, built by American engineers from Philadelphia, that would extend down into China, would extend into the Arctic through the Bering Strait into Canada at the time. That was the whole plan in the 1880s, 1890s, was to build rail through development and find points of mutual collaboration. Again, a lot of the Jews in Russia and Eastern Europe were playing a very big role in driving the labor rights movement as well, like, and which was a big part of, there was a very good part of that whole thing. So the Protocols of Zion, and I'll get back to my thread of Rabbi Kook. Okay. I want to read a quote from this guy. I promise. I won't lose the thread. But Tsar Nicholas II believed that the protocols that the Okhrana agents had given him, which was proven to be a hoax because it's actually taken from a text written 30 years earlier, based on a book called A Discourse Between Machiavelli and Montesquieu, which was basically taking the exact same text and that was wired against Napoleon III in France as a Jewish banker's puppet, but it was a satire, and they basically took the wording, retooled it a little bit, called it the Protocols of Zion, marketed it, and that's proven. So but Tsar Nicholas II read it. He was like, "Oh my God, it's true," and a lot of the Germans were reading it, thinking, "Oh my God, it's true," and Henry Ford was reading it, thinking, "Oh my God, it's true," and then he basically said, "Okay, what do we do?" And his advisors from the Okhrana said, "Just institute pogroms, get all the Jews to go into these little ghettos again." And along the way, a bunch of militant Russian Christians read it as well. It was popularized, and they were killing Jews. They were like lynch mobbing them and stuff. It was a horrific situation for a period, very traumatic. So many of the Jews started a migration process assisted by British intelligence. The British Palestinian Expedition Fund, overseen by the Prince of Wales, was a big part of getting the Jews established now in the desert. And for the ones that were still resistant to wanting to move from from Europe, where they'd lived for centuries, if not longer, and were like established merchants and scientists and artists, well, Hitler made sure that their life became super unbearable, and so that also helped another like wave of flooding. But to set the groundwork, Jabotinsky was working to terrorize, to abduct people, terrorize Arabs and stuff, to create a climate whereby that space could be stolen and a Jewish homeland could be built, but not in the way that the peacemakers wanted, because you had sane Jewish moral peacemakers as well who wanted to live in harmony with the Arabs, like the first Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, who had problems, but overall he was always looking for points of collaboration. Right? He called Jabotinsky Vladimir Hitler. Now, Jabotinsky worked with Rabbi Kook very closely. Rabbi Kook sort of controlled the paramilitary violence aspect of the operation. Rabbi Kook controlled the ideological, spiritual aspect of the most radical Zionist movements. And he created these yeshivas, like the Merkaz Sharav Yeshiva, which is where a lot of the most radical settlers that have done illegal settlements over the past 60 years, all were processed through this yeshiva that radicalizes young Zionists. The guy who killed Yitzhak Rabin was from one of these Rabbi Kook following yeshivas in the 90s. So a very influential guy. Many people in the Likud party are have been indoctrinated into this idea. So here's why I wanted to set the stage for this quote. It's a very important quote. So in the Orot, Rabbi Kook describes his eschatology, his view of the end times, which is that the truth concerning the land is revealed in Kabbalah, which is sort of like the hidden secret teachings of God for the priesthood that are not known in the written Torah. So, right, that's the spoken Torah, which is itself very, there's not one Kabbalah. There's many people who say, "Oh, I've got it. No, I've got it. No, I've got it." Some are more evil than others. So, okay, he says, Jewish mysticism Kabbalah militates for life in the land of Israel. Rationalistic approaches to Judaism place no special value on the land of Israel. So they're trying to infuse spirituality with the physical land. It's called a blood and soil cult. That the blood, our blood comes from specifically that soil and that geographical terrain, which defines our spiritual value. As soon as you start infusing that philosophically, you get into some murky water when you do that. But that's how these things work. Now he says, in wars, national characters crystallize. Israel, as the universal reflection of mankind, benefits thereby. From wars, Israel benefits. that's because our national character crystallizes in war. The heels of Messiah follow upon world conflagration. At the hour of the downfall of Western civilization, Israel is called upon to fulfill its divine mission by providing the spiritual basis for a new world order. Now, he's very much committed to the idea that there is a necessity for a massive purgative world conflagration, and the downfall of Western civilization he sees as a necessary component for any fulfillment of prophecy. He sees that that's necessary. So if you think that that's necessary, well, then doing things that advance war becomes a good, right? And as soon as that mental logical construct is created, you find people who become instruments of their own destruction and don't even realize how they're instruments.
Okay.
So
yep.
it creates, and this is where, like, the more radical George Bush types of neocons who took over control of the Republican Party, in which Trump fought he fought against this thing. A lot of these groupings, if you listen to John Hagee and listen to his sermons calling for and he's been John Hagee's been doing this since the 90s and with his massive, ministries. It's like every moment is the end times and the rapture, and it's great. It's wonderful that now is the time that Iran's going to be wiped off the map. And so obviously the neocon fanatics who want war working with the military industrial complex, they love that. They want that to characterize the Christian movement. They don't want the types of Christians of like John F. Kennedy or Lincoln or Martin Luther King Jr. They don't want those kind of Christians. They want John Hagee because it's geopolitically advantageous, but it's also crazy as shit because now good people are thinking that they have to advance the end of time so that they can do God's will. That's where things get messy. And again, there's a variation within the Islamic. There's a Sufi school as well that interfaces with the Muslim Brotherhood, which has a Freemasonic operation, which has their own eschatology, believing in the Mahdi, which is their version of the Messiah coming at the end times, which it's all good members of the sect believe that it's their job to advance that. So this is why at the upper echelons, the oligarchy would prefer to avoid World War III if they could. They would prefer that everybody just willfully deconstruct their nation states, cancel their civilizational values.
Like Trudeau, when COVID started, said, we're going to be the first, I think he said first, or we will be a post-nation state. That didn't go over well. I never heard him say it again, right? He's giving away. I want to, in this episode, once you're finished with that, actually get to what the hell you think is happening with the Marxism being taught to our kids, the transhumanism through the trans mutilation, and how Canada is being manipulated in this grand scheme, and how that's being done, what you see around us in Canada. Are you finished with what you were just reading?
Oh, yeah. That was the quote. Okay. That was the quote.
That was the quote. Okay. So here we are. This is what you think may happen. So you think that the people in Gaza may be pushed out, right?
Oh, yeah. That's the desire. Yep. The desire is to purge them out, and then send them around the world as part of the global diaspora of homeless people.
Because they mentioned 500,000 coming here. We think 500,000 might come here. So now, as Canadians, what do you see happening, especially since the Trudeau regime came in? We know that a lot of dumb politicians, some may have known, most probably didn't, signed off on, all this sustainability development. What do you think? Do you think that any of this sustainability development is good? Or do you think Canada is being played like everyone else? Are we being trained now to be communists, Marxists? Like, what's going on in your mind in Canada over the last 20 years and now?
Yeah. Well, there is. So I'll address the first aspect of the immigration issue. Part of my job generally as a commentator, as a writer or an analyst, whatever you want to call me, I my job is always to try to keep people focused on the higher principle, because we're often played like a violin based on certain false polarizations or dualisms that are created for us. Are you with us or with the terrorists? Pick one. Well, It's a fake question, right?
Yeah.
Don't play the game. Now there's obviously a lot of people who, when especially going through an economic crisis, and there's an intentionally designed economic crisis, the creation of
Mhm.
scarcity is part of the program.
Yep.
And I'm going to try to use my language carefully because I know you have some platforms you want to string this on that will.
Mhm.
So they will look for, in desperation and without knowledge of how they've been played and how the crisis happened, they will tend to look for an enemy to blame. And
A
now
villain.
an easy enemy, a villain, has been, the Jews, immigrants, whatever.
Mhm.
That's the case of the Great Depression. It's just easy to find people viscerally who are there, that can receive your hate and fear and blame for everything. The Chinese are a new one that's been cooked up by the Five Eyes to get everybody to be afraid of the Chinese and not look at, well, what are the City of London, Soros, Davos banking operations like? Well, what is this thing?
Mhm.
So we're often played. So what I would say is, as far as the Soros operation for immigration that's been pushed by the Rockefeller Foundation since for a very long time, is to undermine the nation state by diffusing different nations of their national character through complete open borders. That's what they want
Mhm.
to do. It's part of a multi-phased project to undermine the nation state system culturally. True. But how do you get people who are in a mass migration process trying to get out of their homeland? Would people
Yeah.
not generally prefer to stay in their homeland? Well, yeah, they would prefer to stay in their homeland. However, when you light their homelands on fire,
Yes.
like we did with our Canada's participation in bombing NATO back to the Stone Age and destroying all their infrastructure, well, that means a lot of Libyans now are all of a sudden seeking a place to feed their kids, and that means that they're going to be part of these migrants coming through the Mediterranean into Europe, into Canada,
Yeah.
wherever they can.
Because if that happened to
They,
us, we would flee where they said we could. We'd be taking our
yeah,
kids out of Canada.
yeah,
S
exactly.
That's the thing, is the humanity of it is, well, the all of us down below, we're all just getting screwed equally. So,
Yeah,
I have compassion for every side that's on the low parts right now. So you think probably they'll come here, probably, but
oh yeah, sure.
what
I mean,
about
that's part of the plan, yes, to bring in
Mhm,
migrants.
mhm. Okay, and so what about the ideology right now that's being taught to kids? I see it. My teenage boys show me this shit.
Mm,
White man bad, Christian
mhm.
bad, Christianity bad. Everyone's a victim to the white man. Why is that being played so high up in Canada and the States a bit? Why are
Mm.
they and then this whole undrip thing where we have to apologize for our existence in Canada because the Indigenous were here first.
Yeah.
Do you see a bigger picture for why this is happening? What is the
Oh
end
yeah.
goal for Canada?
Um. Well, it's the first part is touching upon what I mentioned earlier in our conversation about the Frankfurt School and the Congress for Cultural Freedom and the CIA operation to target and create a victim identity state for the Germans, the German children especially, that would
Mhm,
become the corporate and political leaders, a few decades later.
mhm,
So part of it is, if you can, there's certain characteristics of identity types that make us more easy to manage.
right,
If you can get everybody, if you can cultivate cultural traits that make people feel like they're victims as the essence of who they are, because of whatever attribute they have. I'm a Jew, or I'm an Arab, and I'm a woman. I'm a gay person. I'm a black person. I'm a native. I'm whatever distinguishes you as I'm a human and I'm also this. That also this becomes amplified to your primary identity
mhm,
reference point, and then
mhm,
that new reference point is tied to new stories that only amplify the bad that happened to you, and definitely terrible injustice happened to women. They only got the right to vote in France in what, like 47, and to drive a car in Saudi Arabia, like what, last year or something. Like
right.
it's yeah, like, so
These
women
things are
there's a
true.
lot.
Yeah.
It's a
Mhm.
true fact. There's
Yes.
been systemic problems there of racism as well.
Mhm.
That's a fact. The slavery was real. There's still residuals of real racism. That's a fact. And you know, but if the social engineers will reframe stories for the children that only reinforce all of the points where some opposing school, usually the dominant school, has tended to be, or category of human has been, white European males. That's been the dominant, that's tended to be for the last several centuries, the dominant grouping of humans. So they are then blamed to receive the hate of all of the pain and trauma that we're expected to live in, even if we didn't live through it. So, you know, you've got kids taken through from Israel schools, they're taken to Poland, and they're given multi-week brainwashing sessions to relive the trauma, to lay down the ovens, right? And relive that trauma, take it in, be the trauma, be the pain, be that girl who's hiding from the Nazis. And you know, you do these enough to young people. They do this also with the green movement too, right? They get kids to feel the pain of be the tree that's getting cut, right? Be that. And they put them through this type of brainwashing where these underdeveloped children are then carrying this trauma with them as they build a new edifice of ideology around a very, very painful soul, full of fallacy, that then makes them inclined to want to destroy anybody who's building tractors or, you know, doing lumber. Right.
They're creating future domestic war between all of us too.
Yeah. Yes.
So they're getting played into what the WEF wants, which is actually being used by the oligarchs with things that are true, but bringing back stuff that really isn't relevant to how we can get along today. Everything's relevant, but how we can get along today, so that Canada will just turn into a bit of a cesspool of people hating each other.
Yeah. I mean, it's like what Pierre Trudeau said is, I didn't oversee a multicultural melting pot. No. I created a multicultural mosaic. Now, a lot of people didn't quite get what Pierre Trudeau meant, but there's an evil in what he said, because the melting pot idea of Abraham Lincoln, of the better dynamic of America, was, you know, give us your poor, your oppressed. That's part of the Statue of Liberty idea. America is based on immigrants coming, you know, from Europe. They're not Native Americans per se. And they came in waves. The Irish, many of them were oppressed by the forces of empire. The fires of war, imperial wars, made life unlivable. So they came to the land of liberty, and that's good. If you have like an ethic of morality, of creating abundance, you can take these people, give them productive work, and they will integrate. You know, and sure, they're going to tend to talk with the Italians. We'll talk with the Italians. They need the Irish with the Irish, and sometimes they'll fight. But overall, you got a higher universal code of conduct that makes people American per se, and the
Canadian,
multicultural mosaic, and Canadian, right? And so and that's how Diefenbaker was thinking with his Bill of Rights, that extended universal rights to all people, independent of what your category of person you were in. And a native, an indigenous person would have the same rights as a white or black European descended male or female. And because there were universal rights of voting, of certain protections, according to that was the Diefenbaker Bill of Rights, very different from the Charter of Rights of Pierre Trudeau, that enshrines different categories of type that you assume exist somehow, independent of their universal humanity. And the multicultural mosaic is a bunch of tiles that are unconnected. So you create a situation of people who are only able to cluster with those who think exactly like them, and they're not able to see anything universal in their neighbor in the tile away. So you're physically living together, but it's like a school, a shitty school cafeteria, you know, where only the goths hang out with the goths, and the emos with the emos, and the jocks with the jocks, and they'll never cross-contaminate. That's kind of like what they want to do for the social networking system of the world, where only people talk to people who think just like them on social networks, which is why many of the social networks came out of anthropologists and military psychologists who created this stuff in the 70s and 80s to see how can we map out the behavioral patterns of people who think the same way and profile them on things that became Meta or Twitter, things like that. And And I
Mhm.
still use
And
these things too
even
because,
Klaus
it's
Schwab
right.
said, even Klaus Schwab's book, The Great Reset, he said somewhere in there, it was one of those 2 books he wrote that were near the same time. Um, more and more polarization. I'm paraphrasing. More and more polarization will happen where people will just stick to their own bubble of thought. Like it's going to get worse. And I'm like, well, how does he know that? And this is before a lot of stuff happened.
Yeah.
Well, we're playing identity politics every day on the news and in politics to the point where he realizes it's actually going to do the opposite of what they pretend they're trying to do. Because I was saying, even to Norm, this identity politics, they're not dumb. This has actually pissed so many people off because they're being called the bad person that we've spread out more in our ideology to the point
Mhm.
where, like, I don't hang out with certain people in my family anymore with different ideology because we're literally like Venus and Mars. We are so different in the way we think. Neither of us want to even be around each other. And that is so, so sad, which happened over COVID, right?
Yeah.
So I'm glad. Yeah. So, okay, I'm not as dumb as I thought. I think I knew that was happening in Canada, Matt. Um, and I'm grateful to you that you let me interrupt you with so much more of leading to this moment that we probably missed out to help my viewers understand right now what's happening, because I'm very saddened by, I don't even want to cry, but I'm very saddened by the ability of these handlers to have caused a division that truly wasn't really there before
Mhm.
between people who are smart enough, they know the truth about the last 4 years, are being played. Oh, time to go. My TV says are being played. We need to take a step back from that because we were getting somewhere in our unity to expose the truth about a certain agenda over the last 4 years and other things going on. So, I always like to have shows for a purpose. I don't always invite the same guests on as everyone else, because I feel like this conversation is very important, not just for the regular Joe Blow out there, but for our community too.
Mm.
And I can't, tell you guys enough how great it would be to read a lot of Matt's books and the ones he says to read, and take a look at everything we didn't talk about today. I mean, I could bring you on 100 times. Everyone's trying to bring you on for part 2, 3, 4, and 5. But I wanted to start there so that it's somewhere for our community to grasp a better way of being about this, in my mind.
Hmm. That's a really really thoughtful, loving way of ending this conversation. And you know, I think that feeling of spiritual pain that comes from the universal sentiments, like you're expressing something which exists because of the universal sentiments that love justice and are pained by the absence of justice, or justice unnecessarily being deprived and not being expressed the way God created the universe to be a just and good universe. So that's what I think is the precondition for any true citizen who's sovereign, is to tap into and build a relationship with those universals. And then you start seeing yourself very easily. You put yourself much more easily in the shoes of other people who normally would have a different set of tiles for their multicultural mosaic. You start seeing, oh, there's myself in all of these things, and you can start understanding how different people are played to be
Yeah.
less than what they should be.
Mhm.
And the oligarchy doesn't like it when we do that, because that's what made that way of thinking that you just expressed there so lovingly is the thing that made the American Revolution possible. Like, why would a bunch of farmers want to risk their lives, their families' well-being, even for the sake of some idea of liberty that was being deprived under the unjust system of British controls over the world of 1774, 75? And we had Canadians who fought with Washington under Clement
Yep.
Gosselin, who also fought with Lincoln later on when that opportunity arose. So we have this great freedom-loving legacy that's been withheld from us when we read our sanitized history books that wipe out the positive roles of people like C.D. Howe and W.A.C. Bennett and John Diefenbaker's fights, and Daniel Johnson working with de Gaulle in Quebec to break the empire. All of these wonderful stories that we should be feeding off of, that are tied to JFK's fight, and Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and leaders in Africa. Like, there's so much stuff to feed the soul on that would then empower us to see how to avoid the traps that are set for us today. It's been deprived, but we can get it. It takes a bit more work. My books, I'm hoping that I've made the journey to as efficient as possible in the book series that people could maybe look at, that I've written. First, I wrote the Untold History of Canada 4-volume book series. Badly formatted, I'm sorry, but if people want to pick those up, starts from 1774 all the way to Trudeau's technocratic revolution in 1973, sort of the bookends. That's a good place to start for Canadians. I'd say also The Clash of the Two Americas is another subsequent 4-volume book series, expanding that story a little bit more with the British deep state in America's origins, how it's disrupted so much goodness. And then the newest book I just published this weekend, and that last series I co-wrote with my wife as well. She wrote many wonderful chapters in there. And the most recent book is Science Unshackled, Restoring Causality in a World of Chaos, which has just been released this weekend. So people can find all of that on CanadianPatriot.org. It's right there under my name. And RisingTideFoundation.net, which I manage as a nonprofit educational organization with my wife. That's also available. And lastly, Substack, if people want to pick up or a subscription, there's free and paid. Do a lot of free stuff. So that's MatthewEhret.substack.com.
You do all these podcasts for free. I don't know how you manage your life, because I just see you on every show everywhere. And I'm like, I think he's going to cancel on me because he's done so many shows. He must need to eat at some point. But my final theory is, we live on Earth, which is a battle between good and evil. And I think it always will be. I hate to say it. We're always looking for that end peace. Well, you might get it for 5 minutes. I think we're on a plane of battling for good and evil in a material form, because that's how I can explain what we're living through. Now, one day in a long time, because I want to give you a break, you've delved into the issue of aliens now. That's another show. I want to go there with you one day, but for today, this is enough for my viewers to digest. And Matt, I can't thank you enough. Guys, you need to tell every podcaster that you know about this person. We need to spread some truth. Let's stop hating each other on Twitter right now. It's not serving a purpose with what's happening on the other side of the world. Let's all take a step back, a deep breath, and understand that most of humanity is getting absolutely annihilated right now. And it's a few people at the top that are handling this. Thank you so much, Matt. And I do hope to see you again. Have a really great week.
All right, you too. Yeah, I'm looking forward to our next chat. Take care.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. I didn't want to bother fixing the TV. We are trying to fix that. Apparently, I only have 2 hours before it clicks off. Norb has tried to fix this and saying 2 hours is the max before the TV needs to change the frame so it doesn't get burnt. Sorry about that. I might even do a new background soon, you guys. I think it's time. Anyways, thank you for tuning in. I really hope that you can share this show to everybody who may want a perspective like this to help us all just, chill out a little, and be good instead of evil, because this kind of trauma being put on all of us can bring out the worst in all of us. And we feel that, well, we have a reason to be that way. Yes. But is it serving the greater purpose of unity? Thank you guys so much. One last message from my sponsor, and I will see you guys really soon. Body's most important nutrient. By volume, the average body is 62% hydrogen, 24% oxygen, 12% carbon, and only 2% everything else. Health science is concentrated on minerals and vitamins, but those are part of only the 2%. When considering proteins and carbs, they miss the importance of hydrogen, how we normally get it, and its role in the body. Hydrogen is the building block of life, and it's involved in virtually every chemical process in the body. Without sufficient hydrogen, the body starts shutting down systems that aren't immediately life-threatening to preserve hydrogen and life. First, the regeneration system shut down, you age quicker and heal slowly. Then, the immune system shut down, you get sick easier. And finally, organs start to fail. Science is proving that chronic lack of hydrogen causes or exacerbates nearly every ailment known to man. How do we normally get our hydrogen? What is the best way to get hydrogen into your body? What is Brown's gas? Learn more at aquacure.life. That's aquacure.life. And if you do decide to buy the AquaCure AC50, put Librti spelled normally in the discount code box for 5% off the retail price, and it's a 1-year money-back guarantee. Norb and I absolutely love ours.